Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule.
Nos programmes offrent plusieurs langues. Veuillez visiter suprememastertv.com/schedule.
Nuestros programas ofrecen varios idiomas. Visite suprememastertv.com/schedule.
برنامه‌های ما شامل زبان‌های بسیاری است. از این وبسایت دیدن فرمایید suprememastertv.com/schedule.
The Spanish flu of 1918 was one of the most devastating pandemics ever recorded. What caused this disaster? How can we keep such events from happening again? The Spanish flu of 1918, preventing such events in the future. Continue watching to find out more.
Sally means hello in Belizean Creole, one of the languages spoken in the country of Belize. I'm Luis. The people of Belize thank you for the kind concern that you show toward all beings and for promoting their welfare through the vegan lifestyle. Welcome to our program, The Spanish Flu of 1918, Preventing Such Events in the Future. In today's program, we'll examine the origin, extent, and impact of the 1918 influenza pandemic, and also learn about the change which, if implemented, can prevent such a disaster from occurring in the future. The Spanish flu was one of the most devastating pandemics ever recorded. Starting in the spring of 1918, it eventually spread to almost every corner of the planet. Approximately 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population at the time, were infected by the virus, and 50 to 100 million had died. In the USA, approximately 675,000 people perished. What was the cause of this pandemic? Like COVID-19, the Spanish flu was a zoonotic disease, meaning it originated in animals and was then transmitted to humans. In 2005, a genetic analysis was done for the 1918 virus, obtained from the preserved tissue of a victim, concluded that it had an avian origin, coming from either wild or domestic birds, such as chickens, turkeys, or geese. Although it is often referred to as the Spanish flu, this term is a misnomer as the virus did not originate in Spain. Before arriving in Spain, it had already caused many infections and deaths in Great Britain, France, and the USA. However, these countries were involved in a global conflict at the time, so this information was censored to maintain morale. Spain, a neutral country, was the first nation to openly report the influenza in its newspapers. Thus, it was incorrectly named the Spanish flu. Some of the earliest official reports about the disease came from the US, where an outbreak was recorded on March 11, 1918. At an army training camp in Fort Riley, Kansas. With soldiers frequently on the move, the virus rapidly spread to other US training camps, and then these same men were dispatched to Great Britain and continental Europe. In March 1918, 84,000 US soldiers sailed across the Atlantic to Europe, and in April, an additional 118,000 followed. And unfortunately, the virus went with them. The spread of the disease was also accelerated by the difficult living conditions at the time, especially for soldiers who were forced to live in crowded barracks with poor hygiene and limited access to medical treatment. During battle, thousands of men stood shoulder to shoulder in filthy, squalid mud trenches where they were terrified, exhausted, cold, wet, and hungry, creating perfect conditions for the virus to spread. The US soldiers were among those most severely impacted. In fact, more US servicemen perished from the 1918 influenza than were killed in the war. 40% of the US Navy and 36% of the Army became infected. Although the pandemic quickly spread around the world, some countries were particularly hard hit. For example, on the Pacific island of Samoa, 22% of the population died, while in Iran, 20% perished. As is the case with most viruses, the Spanish flu was especially lethal for people who were 65 years of age and older, and for infants and young children. But an unusual fact about this disease was that it also caused a high mortality rate among people in the prime of life. Nearly half of the deaths occurred among individuals between the age of 20 and 40. Humans were truly at the mercy of the Spanish flu, as no test for the virus existed. Moreover, there was no vaccine, nor were there any antibiotics, as penicillin was not discovered until 10 years later. Thus, the only forms of protection were social isolation, good personal hygiene, the wearing of face masks, and limitations on the size of public gatherings. Communications were also inadequate, making safeguards difficult to implement. Only the wealthy could afford telephones, so newspapers were the primary means of transmitting information. The pandemic struck in 3 separate waves, with the first beginning in early 1918. Although the virus was highly contagious during this wave, the symptoms were relatively mild. Most of those infected had flu-like symptoms for a couple of days, and usually recovered. Over the summer, the pandemic appeared to subside. However, during this time, the virus mutated. When it returned, it was much more lethal. The second more deadly influenza strain appeared in France, Sierra Leone, and the United States. This time, those infected quickly experienced more severe effects, including extreme fatigue, high fever, headache, and a dry cough. The victims' condition quickly worsened, and many died within 24 hours, and death was excruciating, with blistering fevers, nasal hemorrhaging, and pneumonia, as the victims gradually drowned in their own fluid-filled lungs. In addition, the mortality rate of the second wave was high. The World Health Organization estimated that from 2 to 3% of those infected died. By October of 1918, the influenza had reached its peak, and it was in that month that the greatest number of fatalities occurred. During October, approximately 200,000 people in the US perished from the Spanish flu. When the second wave struck, many people failed to comprehend its severity, leading to disastrous consequences. For example, in September, in Philadelphia, USA, the city's leaders decided to go ahead with their Liberty Lawn Parade, which was attended by tens of thousands of people. Within 72 hours, all the beds in Philadelphia's 31 hospitals were filled. Over the next 10 days, 2,600 Philadelphians had died, and another 200,000 were sick. By March 1919, 15,000 of the city's residents have lost their lives. By December 1918, the second wave was over, and the pandemic appeared to have subsided again. However, the reprieve was brief. World War I ended on November 11, 1918, and soldiers returned to their homelands, bringing with them an unexpected gift, the influenza virus. Thus, a third wave of the pandemic emerged, commencing in January 1919 and lasting until June 1919. By the time it finally ended, 28% of the US population had been infected. The Spanish flu spread even to the most remote parts of the globe. In 1918, Breivik Mission, an isolated community on the western shores of Alaska, was home to around 80 adults, most of whom were Inuit natives. It is not known how the virus reached this tiny, isolated village, but over a 5-day period from November 15 to 20, 1918, the pandemic claimed the lives of 72 of the village's 80 adults.
The war was finally over, even as the plague and its effects lingered on. In the US, it killed about 675,000. The flu killed an estimated 3% of the entire world population. In Latin America, the flu killed 10 out of every 1,000 people. In Africa, about 15 out of every 1,000 died, and in parts of Asia, the death rate was as high as 35 per thousand. In Tahiti, it killed 10% of the population, and in Western Samoa, 20% of the population died. In India alone, it killed about 20 million people. You may be asking yourself, could a deadly flu like that happen again? It's important to understand that the Spanish flu was devastating for a number of reasons unique to that time. However, the essential formula for epidemics still exists. Viruses sometimes jump species, for instance from pigs to human. This could happen at any time, anywhere in the world. And of course, flu viruses are constantly mutating. Usually mutations are minor, but occasionally a big mutation can happen. This has happened a few times in recent history. For instance, the Russian flu of 1889 killed about 1 million people. The Asian flu of 1957 killed about 2 million. And the Hong Kong flu of 1968 also killed about 2 million.
The Spanish flu continues to plague the world today as the common flu. The Center for Disease Control, CDC, estimates that between 3,000 and 49,000 people in the US die each year from flu-associated illnesses. The Spanish flu devastated the earth. What can we do to prevent such pandemics in the future? Dr. Gordon Galia, World Health Organization representative to China, explained the primary cause of these viruses.
As long as people eat meat, there is going to be some risk of infection.
Supreme Master Chin Hai frequently reminds us that there is only one solution to all pandemics. We must stop all killing, both of our fellow humans and our animal co-inhabitants. Both the Spanish flu and COVID-19 were caused by the accumulated karma from killing others, and humanity must suffer a lockdown as a result. Master explains why this lockdown is both necessary and karmic.
Remember the so-called Spanish flu?
Yes.
Because the lockdown, the curfew has been reopened so early. They had the second wave of Spanish flu which killed millions of people.
Oh.
Therefore, the close down is very important. It's very necessary to save lives.
Yes, Master. Master, how long do you think this lockdown will last?
Oh, my God. It lasts as long as the karma, the consequences of our actions, of our killing actions, has not been leveled out.
Yes, Master.
We have to pay the karmic consequences of treating each other wrongly. Like we imprison prisoners of war, we just start war for any reason and imprison people and the animals. You can see they are locked down all their lives and then die a horrible death at the end.
Yes, Master.
So this karma cannot be escaped.
Mm.
You got it now?
Yes, Master. Is there something more that we can do to help people lessen the karma somehow?
Yes. You can change it by taking dramatic counter-reaction, okay?
Yes. What's this counter-reaction?
It's go total vegan. So simple.
Yes.
Go total vegan.
Many thanks, Supreme Master Chin Hai, for pointing out that by making the simple change of adopting a compassionate, novel vegan lifestyle, we can prevent pandemics from happening in the future. We pray that we will soon be living in a compassionate vegan world where everyone's safety and health is assured. Cherished viewers, thank you for your company today. Coming up next is From the Gnostic Naghamari Library on the Resurrection and the Father, Part 2 of 2, right after noteworthy news. Through the grace of the Divine, may you grow in spiritual consciousness and wisdom every day.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule and suprememastertv.com/show.